The jungle was silent the day they found the tomb. Buried under centuries of dirt and fear, the stone door should have stayed shut. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wet earth and something older, something wrong. Two skeletons lay side by side, their bones too long, their skulls twisted in ways that made the diggers step back. Between them sat a small black box, its surface covered in symbols no one could read, humming softly like a sleeping beast. The workers crossed themselves and ran, but it was too late. The scientists came next, armed with tools and arrogance, sure they could explain the unexplainable. They took the bones. They opened the box. And then the whisper started. People began vanishing. First the night watchman, then the archaeologist who touched the skulls. The ones left behind spoke of nightmares, of two pale figures standing at the foot of their beds, watching. The government sealed the records, but the truth won't stay buried. This is the story of the Mexican twins that should never have been found, the mystery that ate a village, and the warning carved into those tomb walls that no one understood until it was too late. They are not dead. They are waiting. Now, they're awake. Welcome to Behind the Genius, where we pull back the curtain on history's greatest minds to reveal what textbooks won't teach you. This isn't just about celebrating brilliance, it's about exposing the hidden costs of genius. The stolen breakthroughs. The censored experiments. The personal demons that fueled world-changing ideas. From Da Vinci's forbidden notebooks to Tesla's lost inventions, from the bloody rivalries behind scientific revolutions to the government conspiracies that silenced visionaries, we go where mainstream history fears to tread. Each video is a journey into the shadows of innovation, where ambition, obsession, and sometimes madness collide. You'll discover the uncomfortable truths behind iconic discoveries, and learn why some knowledge remains locked away. The most fascinating stories aren't about success, they're about what someone risked, lost, or sacrificed to change the world. Subscribe and join us as we uncover what really happens. Behind the Genius. The sun burned hot over the small Mexican village that morning in 1987. A crew of local workers dug for a new well behind the old church, their shovels biting into the dry earth. Manuel, the foreman, wiped sweat from his brow as his crew worked. Deeper, he urged them. The village needed this water badly. Then Juan's shovel hit something hard. Not rock, the metallic clang was wrong. The men gathered around as Juan scraped away more dirt, revealing a flat stone slab covered in strange markings. Manuel ran his fingers over the carvings, twisting lines that looked like snakes eating their own tails. A bad feeling settled in his gut. "Keep digging," he ordered, against his better judgment. As they cleared more dirt, the outline of a tomb emerged. The stone door had no handle, no visible way to open it. But when Ramon pushed against it with his boot, the slab groaned open like it had been waiting for them. A rush of cold air poured out, smelling of wet earth and something older, like copper and burnt hair. Inside, two skeletons lay on a stone platform. Perfect twins, their bones identical down to the smallest finger joint. But wrong. So wrong. Their arms were wrapped around each other in an embrace that looked almost painful. Their skulls tilted toward each other, foreheads touching like they'd been whispering when death came. Between their ribcages sat a small black box, its surface covered in the same twisting symbols as the tomb door. The metal shimmered oddly in the flashlight beam, like oil on water. Against all reason, Manuel reached for it. The moment his fingers touched the box, pain shot up his arm. Not heat, a deep, unnatural cold that burned. He yanked his hand back with a cry, staring at his blackened fingertips. The other workers crossed themselves. Old Pedro began praying loudly in Spanish. That night in his small house, Manuel woke to whispering. Not from outside his window, from inside his room. Two voices, speaking in perfect unison in a language that hurt his ears. He scrambled for the light switch. The bulb flickered on to reveal his empty bedroom. But his boots by the door were full of wet dirt, though he'd cleaned them before bed. And on his nightstand, a single long black hair that hadn't been there before. At dawn, Manuel was gone. His bed looked like he'd been dragged from it, the sheets tangled and torn. The only clue, more of those strange symbols scratched into his wooden floor, still damp with something dark and sticky. The scientists arrived 3 days later from the university in Mexico City. Dr. Ibarra, the lead anthropologist, dismissed the workers' stories as superstition. "A fascinating burial site," she declared, carefully photographing the skeletons. "Likely pre-Aztec twins of importance." But her confident smile faded when the X-rays came back. The bones showed strange ridges no human skeleton should have, thin, spiraling patterns along the femurs and ribs. The DNA samples sent to the lab returned with a single word stamped across the report: contaminated. Lab technician Miguel swore he saw the bones shift position overnight. Like they moved when no one was watching, he told Dr. Ibarra, who scoffed. But the next morning, the security footage showed the femurs had indeed changed angle by 15 degrees between 2:17 a.m. and 2:19 a.m. The timestamp video revealed nothing but static during those 2 minutes. The villagers knew better than to stick around. Old women hung garlic and crosses over their doors. Children were kept inside after dark. At the cantina, the remaining workers drank heavily and told stories of Los Gemelos Malditos, the cursed twins said to walk the roads at night, looking for their missing bones. Young Father Alonso from the church tried to bless the tomb, but collapsed halfway through the ritual, screaming about the door opening. He spent the next week in bed, muttering in a mix of Spanish and something older, his fever never breaking. On the last day of excavation, Dr. Ibarra finally opened the black box. The moment the lid cracked, every light in camp blew out. When power returned, the box was empty, but the air smelled suddenly of ozone and rotting flowers. And the bones? The bones were smiling. That night, Miguel disappeared. They found his lab coat the next morning, neatly folded by the tomb entrance. Inside the pockets, handfuls of dirt, and a single baby tooth that DNA tests would later match to Miguel, from when he was 6 years old. Dr. Ibarra ordered the site closed. The bones were carefully packed for transport to the university. The tomb was resealed with concrete. But as the trucks pulled away, villagers swore they saw 2 pale figures standing where the tomb had been. Watching, waiting, and holding hands. The university lab in Mexico City should have been safe. Bright fluorescent lights. Sterile steel tables. The hum of expensive machines. But when Dr. Ibarra unsealed the crate holding the twins' bones, the air turned thick, like the room itself was holding its breath. Miguel's disappearance had been officially labeled voluntary leave, though everyone knew better. His empty lab coat haunted them. Now, as Dr. Ibarra lifted the first skull from the packing foam, the overhead lights flickered. Just once. A coincidence, she told herself. The bones didn't behave like normal specimens. At first, the anomalies were small. The calipers wouldn't stay calibrated near the femurs. The scales registered different weights each time they measured the same bone. Then the X-rays came back with impossible shadows, dark patches in the bones that looked like cavities. But when Dr. Ibarra peered into the skull's eye sockets with a penlight, something peered back. Not a reflection. A presence. She dropped the skull. It hit the table with a sound like a church bell. Across the lab, young research assistant Luisa screamed. The bones she'd been cataloging had rearranged themselves into a perfect circle when her back was turned. The security footage showed nothing unusual, just Luisa stepping away, then returning to find the bones moved. Except, if you watched frame by frame, in the millisecond between 2 frames, the shadows under the table grew teeth. That night, Luisa dreamt of the twins. Not as skeletons. As living children. Pale. Too pale. Standing at the foot of her bed, holding hands. Their mouths moved in unison. You took us from home. When she woke, her apartment smelled of wet earth, and her bathroom mirror was covered in fingerprints. Small ones, child-sized, made of something dark and flaking. Like dried blood. Back at the lab, the DNA results finally came in. Dr. Ibarra expected contamination errors. What she got was worse. The report's conclusion section contained just 3 words, printed in bold. Not human origin. Below that, in handwritten red ink, someone had added, "Put them back before it's too late." No one claimed responsibility for the note. The night security guard reported hearing children laughing in the empty lab. Then the recording started. Every voice recorder near the bones picked up whispers. Not electronic interference, actual voices. 2 of them. Speaking in an unknown language that made listeners nauseous. Linguistics experts identified 17 distinct phonemes that shouldn't exist in any human vocal range. When played backward, the whispers formed perfect Spanish. "We want our box." The black box. The one they'd left at the dig site. Dr. Ibarra called the village. The mayor's voice shook as he explained. The box had vanished from the locked evidence room. The only clue, a trail of small bare footprints leading from the tomb to the edge of town. As if 2 children had walked out of the earth. That same night, the lab's motion sensors triggered at 3:17 a.m. The live feed showed the bones, dancing. Not scattered. Not arranged. Actually moving in a slow, grotesque waltz across the table. Then the camera cut to static. When the feed restored, the bones were back in their cases. But the security logs showed the door hadn't opened. Luisa quit the next morning. She left a note on Dr. Ibarra's desk. "They're in my dreams every night now. The twins say you'll be next." That afternoon, workers found the concrete seal on the tomb cracked clean in half, as if something had pushed its way out. Dr. Ibarra ordered the bones locked in the high-security vault. As she turned the key, she could have sworn she heard two small hands clapping. Slow. Mocking. Somewhere far away, a child giggled. The university chancellor shut down the project that evening. Official reason: budget constraints. Unofficially? 3 janitors had been found unconscious near the lab, their hair turned white, their fingers stained black with grave dirt. They loaded the bones into a military transport truck at midnight. Armed guards. No paperwork. As the truck pulled away, Dr. Ibarra noticed 2 small shapes watching from the university roof. Well, holding hands. Then the street light flickered. And they were gone. The bones never made it to the secure facility. The truck was found abandoned on a dirt road 50 miles north of the village. The back doors were ripped open from the inside. The guards? Gone. Only their boots remained, neatly lined up, filled to the brim with freshly turned earth. And on the truck's dusty windshield, someone had drawn a symbol with their finger, the same twisting mark from the tomb door. Dr. Ibarra flew back to the village the next morning. She had to see the tomb for herself. The broken concrete seal wasn't the worst part. Nor were the child-sized footprints leading away from the site. Not even the black box, now sitting proudly atop the tomb, clean as if it had never been buried for centuries. The worst part was the sound. From deep inside the tomb came a rhythmic scraping, like 2 sets of small fingernails. Digging. The road into the village looked different now. Dr. Ibarra noticed it the moment her jeep passed the crumbling welcome sign. The air smelled wrong. Not the usual dry heat and cooking fires, but something damp and old like open soil and wet stones. The villagers who came out to watch her arrival didn't meet her eyes. Their faces were drawn, their hands clutching rosaries and makeshift amulets. Dried herbs, rusted nails, tiny mirrors sewn into cloth. Old Pedro was the first to speak. "You should not have come back, doctor." His voice cracked like dead leaves. "They're angry now." The tomb stood at the edge of the village, half hidden by scrub brush. The broken concrete seal lay in pieces, the edges unnaturally smooth as if something had melted through it. And the sound, that awful rhythmic scraping, echoed faintly from the darkness within. But it was the black box that made Dr. Ibarra's breath catch. Perched atop the tomb, clean and gleaming, it hummed softly. A sound that didn't match the movement of its lid, opening and closing, slowly like a mouth tasting the air. The first disappearance. Little Rosa vanished that night. 8 years old, last seen chasing her ball near the square. They found the ball lodged in a thorn bush, covered in fingerprints too large to be hers. Her mother woke screaming at 3 a.m. to the sound of 2 children giggling under her bed. When she looked, she found only wet footprints leading to the window, 1 set coming in, 1 set going out. Father Alonso tried to bless the tomb again. This time, he barely made it through the first prayer before his nose began bleeding. The villagers watched in horror as the holy water in his flask turned black and began boiling. When he dropped it, the liquid moved against the wind, forming those same twisting symbols before sinking into the earth. The offerings. By week's end, the villagers started leaving gifts at the tomb's entrance. Not flowers or candles. Things children might like. Dolls with their heads removed. Handfuls of teeth, animal mostly. Glass marbles filled with dark liquid no one wanted to identify. And every morning these offerings would be gone. In their place, small bones. Fresh ones. A rabbit's ribcage one day, a bird's skull the next. Always arranged in that same symbol. The dreams. Then the dreams started. Not just for Luisa anymore. Half the village reported seeing them, the twins, but not as skeletons. As pale, smiling children with too many teeth. They spoke in unison, their voices like dry paper rubbing together. "We want our bones back. We want our box. We want to play." Those who resisted woke with dirt under their nails, their sheets stiff with dried blood not their own. A farmer found his entire field plowed overnight in perfect spirals. Another man's well water turned thick and red, though tests showed no known contaminant. The journal. Dr. Ibarra found the journal in the abandoned church archives. Fray Benito's personal account, 1793. The pages described an almost identical discovery, 2 child skeletons unearthed during a chapel expansion. The friar wrote of nightmares, of villagers sleepwalking to the gravesite, of a black box that wept black tears when the moon was high. The final entry was a single sentence, the ink blurred as if by water or tears. "They are not dead. They are waiting." And they are hungry. Beneath it, a crude drawing of two figures standing over a third much smaller one. The choice. The village elders called a meeting at dawn. Dr. Ibarra expected anger. Instead she found resignation. "We must give them what they want," said old Pedro. The plan was simple. Return the remaining bones to the tomb. Leave the black box unopened. And most importantly, "We must give them a child," whispered Rosa's mother, her eyes vacant. "One for each of them. To replace what was taken." Dr. Ibarra recoiled. "We're not sacrificing children." But as she stormed out, she noticed the villagers weren't looking at her. They were looking past her. At the tomb, where two small, pale hands now gripped the edges of the opening. Slowly, deliberately, pulling something up from the dark. The hands were the color of old bone. Dr. Ibarra froze as the tiny fingers curled around the tomb's broken edges, their nails blackened like they'd been scratching at stone for centuries. The villagers behind her didn't scream, they didn't even breathe. The only sound was the dry rattle of rosary beads trembling in old Pedro's hands. Then the church bell rang. Not the slow, measured toll of Sunday Mass. A frantic, uneven clanging as if something had grabbed the rope. The spell broke. Women grabbed their children and ran. Men reached for machetes and rusted revolvers. Dr. Ibarra stumbled back as the hands tensed, pulling something up from the darkness. A head. Pale as maggot flesh. Hair like cobwebs. Eyes that weren't eyes at all, just smooth dark hollows that somehow stared. The left twin's mouth opened. No sound came out. But every villager's teeth ached. The first night, they barricaded themselves in the church. Not out of faith, the holy water fonts had turned to sludge, the crucifix above the altar now hung upside down, but because its stone walls were the thickest in the village. Children huddled under pews while men took shifts watching the windows. Father Alonso whispered prayers through bleeding lips. Dr. Ibarra crouched by a stained-glass window, peering through the broken pane. The moonlit square stood empty except for the black box, which now sat precisely in the center, its lid gaping open. Then movement. Two small figures emerged from the tomb's mouth, moving in perfect sync. Not crawling, gliding, their tattered burial shrouds floating inches above the ground. The twins stopped by the box, their hollow faces tilting toward the church. A scream tore through the night. From the Hernandez house across the square. When the villagers forced the door open at dawn, they found the parents catatonic in their bed, their hands clasped tight around a single object, their youngest daughter's left shoe filled to the brim with wet soil. Of the girl herself, no trace. Except the walls. Every inch of plaster had been covered in child-sized handprints, their outlines burned into the surface like brands. And between them, scrawled in what might have been charcoal or old blood. 1. The second night, they tried fire. Old Pedro led the men at dusk, dousing the tomb in gasoline. The flames roared 20 feet high, turning the stone black. But when the fire died, the tomb stood untouched. No soot. No heat. Just the faint smell of birthday candles. That night the twins took the Ramirez boy. They found him at sunrise standing in the town well, water up to his chin, his eyes wide and unblinking. He didn't react when they pulled him out. Didn't react when his mother shook him. Only when someone mentioned the word twins, did he move. His head snapped toward the speaker, and in a voice not his own, two voices said, 2. Then he collapsed, his hair turned snow white. The well water boiled away by noon. The offer. The village split. Some wanted to flee. Others, led by Rosa's mother, began leaving baskets of food at the tomb, raw meat, jars of honey, once even a live chicken. These disappeared by morning, replaced by tiny bones strung on sinew, forming that same cursed symbol. Dr. Ibarra found the mayor's ledger hidden under the church altar. A list of names. Children's names. With dates going back to 1793, the year Fray Benito wrote his journal. Every 10 years like clockwork. The last entry read, "Given Javier and Marisol, blessed be their sacrifice." Below it fresh ink. Tonight, Elena and Mateo. She confronted the mayor as he sharpened his ceremonial knife. "It's the only way," he whispered. 2 every 10 years or they take a dozen. The old bargain. Bargain with what? His eyes flicked to the window. Things that were here before the Spanish. Before the Aztecs. Things that hate. Outside the black box began to sing. The ritual. They dressed Elena and Mateo in white. The children, no older than 6, were drugged with some herbal concoction that left them glassy-eyed but walking. Villagers formed a procession, carrying torches that burned with unnatural blue flames. Dr. Ibarra watched in horror from the church bell tower as they led the children to the tomb. The twins waited. Not as ghosts now. Solid. Real. Their hollow eyes fixed on the offerings. The mayor began chanting in a language that made Dr. Ibarra's nose bleed. The black box's humming rose to a shriek. As he raised the knife. Gunfire. Dr. Ibarra hadn't realized she'd grabbed the old revolver from the church wall. The bullet took the mayor in the shoulder. Chaos erupted. The twins' heads snapped toward the noise, their mouths opening too wide, revealing rows of needle teeth. Then the ground shook. The tomb collapsed in on itself, swallowing the black box. The twins shrieked, a sound like steam escaping a corpse, and lunged not at the children but at Dr. Ibarra. She fired again. The bullet passed clean through the first twin's head with no effect. They were on her in seconds. Cold hands gripped her wrists. Two voices whispered in her ears. You took. Now you give. Pain exploded behind her eyes as some knowledge, was ripped from her mind. The last thing she saw before passing out was the twins dragging something out of the ruined tomb. Something big. Something that wore Javier and Marisol's faces. The aftermath. Dr. Ibarra woke in Mexico City. 3 weeks had passed. Her lab was shut down. The bones? Officially lost in transport. The villagers claimed no memory of her ever visiting. The only evidence, a single page from Fray Benito's journal tucked in her pocket, its edges burnt. One paragraph stood out. The twins are but the door. The hungry ones wait behind them. 10 years we buy with sacrifice. 1 century they demand a feast. The box must never open fully. Beneath it, a new sentence had appeared in handwriting that matched hers. I remember choosing Elena and Mateo. Her hand shook, because she did remember. Remembered voting with the others. Remembered holding the knife. Remembered the twins smiling as she. Her phone rang. Unknown number. When she answered, all she heard was 2 children giggling, and the unmistakable sound of a black box creaking open. The giggling on the phone lasted exactly 13 seconds before cutting to static. Dr. Ibarra sat frozen in her Mexico City apartment, the receiver slipping from her fingers. Outside her window, the usual hum of nighttime traffic had gone silent. Even the distant barking of street dogs had ceased. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and something metallic, like old blood on copper wires. She told herself it was just trauma. That the villagers had drugged her. That everything since the tomb could be explained. Then her bathroom faucet turned on by itself. Not the steady flow of water, but a rhythmic drip, 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 each drop hitting the porcelain with the precision of a metronome. When she forced herself to look, the sink was filling with thick, dark liquid. Not water. Not quite blood. Something in between, with the consistency of syrup and the coppery stench of a fresh wound. Floating in the center, a single baby tooth. The same one from Miguel's lab coat pocket. The first mark. Sleep brought no relief. Dr. Ibarra dreamt of a vast, dark space. Not a tomb but something older. A cavern with walls that pulsed like living tissue. The twins stood at its center, their skeletal hands clasped around a familiar shape. The black box, now twice its original size, it seems leaking a viscous black fluid. You woke us, they whispered, their voices perfectly synchronized. Now they wake too. Behind them shadows moved. Not the play of light, distinct, purposeful shapes pressing against the cavern walls from some unimaginable other side. Something about their proportions made her stomach lurch. Limbs too long, joints bending in impossible directions. She woke screaming, her sheets soaked with sweat and that same dark fluid from her sink. On her forearm, a new mark had appeared. 2 tiny handprints burned into her skin, their fingers elongated, their palms fused together at the wrist like conjoined twins. The pain came when she tried to wash it off. Not surface pain, a deep, internal wrongness as if the mark had roots winding through her veins. By dawn, thin black lines had begun spiderwebbing out from the handprints, tracing her vascular system like a grotesque anatomy lesson. The second disappearance. Her research assistant Luisa was waiting in her office the next morning. Or what was left of her. The young woman sat perfectly still at Dr. Ibarra's desk, her posture unnaturally erect. Her skin had taken on a waxy pallor, her lips stitched shut with what looked like human hair. Most horrifying of all, her eyes were gone. Not gouged out. Not rotted. Removed with surgical precision, the sockets now housing 2 familiar objects. The twins' finger bones. Protruding from the empty orbits like grotesque tusks. On the desk before her, Luisa's hands were folded around a tape recorder. Dr. Ibarra's own trembling fingers pressed play. Static. Then. Subject shows stage 3 infiltration, came Luisa's voice but distorted, slowed down to half speed. The pattern matches the 1793 and 1893 outbreaks. Containment impossible once the box reaches critical mass. Final recommendation: terminate the carrier before. A wet crunch interrupted the recording. The sound of teeth meeting in living flesh. Then two children giggling. Luisa's corpse stood abruptly, her head tilting to a physically impossible angle. The finger bones in her eye sockets twitched. From somewhere deep in the university halls, a chorus of screams erupted, followed by the unmistakable sound of a black box humming to life. Dr. Ibarra ran. The pattern emerges. Mexico City streets were eerily quiet for midday. Not empty but wrong. People stood frozen in place, their heads tilted upward as if watching some invisible celestial event. Their mouths hung slack, strands of that same black fluid dripping from their lips. Every television in every shop window showed the same image. An aerial view of the village, the collapsed tomb now glowing with a sickly greenish light. The news ticker scrolled endlessly. Blackout continues, military quarantine in effect. Priests report statues weeping blood. Her phone buzzed with a notification. A document had been emailed from her own account. The file contained scans of previously classified pages from Fray Benito's journal, along with modern annotations in handwriting that matched hers. The twins are but the first seal. The box is the lock. Every 100 years they test the bars. The hungry ones remember when this world was theirs. Attached were satellite images showing the village's layout, not random buildings but a perfect replica of that cavern from her dreams. The tomb? Positioned exactly where the black box sat in the vision. And spreading outward from that central point, faint heat signatures in the shape of grasping hands. Hundreds of them. Growing larger by the hour. The third night. The power failed citywide at 3:17 a.m. Dr. Ibarra watched from her high-rise window as darkness swallowed Mexico City block by block. Not the gentle fate of a blackout, but something predatory, alive. The last functioning streetlights revealed shapes moving in the gloom, pale, spindly figures herding the sleepwalking masses toward the city center. Toward the Zocalo, where an enormous black obelisk now stood. It hadn't been there yesterday. The structure pulsed with that same greenish light, its surface carved with millions of tiny interlocking versions of the twin symbol. At its base, two familiar child-sized figures worked tirelessly, their hands moving in perfect unison as they pried open a seam in the obelisk's side. From within came a sound like 1,000 stomachs growling in unison. Her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Your turn to choose. Attached was a live feed showing the university's main lecture hall. Dozens of students sat motionless in their seats, their eyes sewn shut with black thread. At the podium stood Luisa's corpse, now holding an ornate knife, the same one the village mayor had used in the ritual. On the chalkboard behind her, written in what might have been blood or that ever-present black fluid. One city or one world? The decision. The military checkpoint at the city limits was abandoned. Not overrun, vacated. Uniforms and weapons lay neatly arranged on the ground, each set of gear positioned as if the wearer had simply stepped out of their skin. The road beyond was littered with shoes, all filled to the brim with damp soil. Dr. Ibarra's stolen jeep was the only vehicle moving. The mark on her arm had spread to her shoulder now, the black tendrils forming intricate patterns that matched the obelisk's carvings. With each passing mile the pain lessened, replaced by something worse. Clarity. Memories not her own flooded her mind. A time before cities. Before civilizations. When the earth was young and hungry, and things older than God slithered beneath its skin. The twins hadn't been sacrifices. They'd been wardens. And humanity had broken the only rule that mattered. Never dig too deep. Her phone buzzed again. The screen showed a countdown. 59 minutes and 59 seconds. 59 minutes and 58 seconds. 59 minutes and 57 seconds. Beneath it, a single instruction. Bring them home. In her rearview mirror, the first of the hungry ones breached the obelisk. They moved like liquid given form, stretching, contracting, their bodies defying physics with every motion. Where they passed, the air itself seemed to rot, colors bleaching to grayscale before crumbling away entirely. The countdown hit 30 minutes when she reached the village outskirts. The tomb was gone. The hole breathed. Dr. Ibarra stood frozen at the edge of the abyss, Javier and Marisol's hollow eyes locked onto hers. The ground beneath her feet vibrated with something deeper than an earthquake. A pulse, slow and rhythmic like the heartbeat of something vast stirring from sleep. The children smiled. Not with innocence. With recognition. You remember now, they said, their voices no longer fully human. And she did. Fragments of impossible memories surged through her. Visions of a time before time, when the earth was young and soft as rotting fruit, when the things that lived beneath its skin still sang in the dark. The twins hadn't been mere guardians. They were the last of the old one's children, left behind to stand watch over the prison humanity didn't know it lived atop. And she had broken the seal. The countdown on her phone hit 15 minutes. The descent. Javier took her hand. His fingers were cold and too flexible, the bones moving under his skin like snakes. "They're waiting," he whispered. The hole swallowed them whole. Darkness pressed in from all sides, thick and wet as oil. The air smelled of spoiled milk and open graves. Dr. Ibarra's mark burned brighter with every step, its black tendrils now covering half her face, pulsing in time with the distant heartbeat. Then, light. Not daylight. A sickly greenish glow emanating from walls that weren't stone but something organic, veined and glistening. The tunnel opened into a cavern so vast its ceiling vanished into gloom. At its center stood the true black box. Not the small artifact from the tomb, a monolith 3 stories tall, its surface writhing with those same carved symbols, now visibly squirming like trapped insects. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, leaking streams of that same black fluid that had infected her sink, her dreams, her veins. And pressed against the inside of those cracks. Shapes. Fingers. Faces. Entire limbs straining to push through. Marisol giggled and pressed her palm to the box. Almost time. The truth. The visions came faster now. Dr. Ibarra saw the first war, not between nations but between the things that had ruled the young earth and the upstart apes who dug too deep. She saw the final battle, the desperate ritual that had trapped the old ones beneath the world's skin. Saw the twins, the last of their kind, given one terrible task. To stand guard. To test each new civilization. And if that civilization grew too curious, too reckless, to open the door. "You passed the first test," Javier said, stroking the box like a beloved pet. "The village chose sacrifice over knowledge. But you." His hollow eyes gleamed. "You brought us to the city. To the scholars. To the ones who dig deepest of all." The countdown hit 5 minutes. The box shuddered. Something on the other side pressed back. The choice. Marisol held out the knife. The same one from the village. From the university. Its blade was no longer steel but something darker, its edge serrated with tiny teeth. "Finish what you started," she whispered. Dr. Ibarra's hand moved without her consent, the mark's tendrils twitching like puppet strings. The knife's hilt fit perfectly against her palm, as if it had always belonged there. Before her the box's cracks widened. A voice, not the twins, not anything remotely human, boomed through the cavern. "We remember your taste." The countdown hit 1 minute. Javier and Marisol began to unfold, their bodies elongating, their skin splitting to reveal the ancient things that had worn them like costumes. "The lock needs blood," they crooned, their true voices emerging at last. "Your blood. Your world. Or just your city. Choose." Images flooded her mind. Mexico City vanishing into a mouth of shadows. The world's great libraries burning as things with too many eyes crawled from the shelves. A single sacrifice. Herself. Her memories. Her name. To buy another century of silence. The countdown hit 5 seconds. Dr. Ibarra plunged the knife into her own marked arm. The silence. She woke in a white room. No marks. No scars. Just a faint ache behind her eyes and the sterile smell of antiseptic. A nurse smiled down at her. "You gave us quite a scare, doctor. 3 weeks unconscious after that lab accident." "Accident?" Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "The gas leak at the university. Don't worry, your research was saved." The nurse handed her a file. Inside, photographs of a pristine tomb excavation. Notes on a pair of perfectly ordinary pre-Aztec skeletons. And at the bottom, a carbon dating report that made her hands shake. Approximate age, 100 years. No black box. No twins. No missing children. Just one final page tucked between the sheets. A faded sketch of 2 figures standing guard over a vast door. At the bottom, in handwriting that matched her own. "They always forget. But we remember. And we are waiting." The hospital TV flickered to life without warning. The news showed Mexico City's Zocalo, bustling with normal midday crowds. Then, for a single frame, every person in the shot turned to stare directly at the camera, their eyes hollow, their mouths moving in unison. The transmission cut to static. When it returned, the anchor chattered about unseasonably warm weather. Dr. Ibarra looked down at her discharge papers. The signature line read, "Carrier. Next cycle, 2123. And beneath it, freshly inked, "We always need new wardens."